Hey guys, I'm Dov, and today I'm back with another faction overview video. If this is the first one you've seen, essentially what I'm going to do is go through the roster. This time we're covering Bretonnia. So essentially, this video is meant for a few things. Number one, for those of you who don't have Total War Warhammer 1, who don't have access to Bretonnia, I'm going to go through the entire roster so that you can have a reference point to go back to see what units they can possibly bring, especially for those of you who are newer at multiplayer, maybe aren't super familiar with all the factions yet. This is going to give you a reference guide to the entire roster of Bretonnia. I'm also going to talk about using Bretonnia, obviously, their strengths and weaknesses, how you use them, and also effective ways of fighting against them. We're going to be going through every aspect as much as possible. So let's get started straight to the roster. And I should go ahead and also preface just quickly, this is obviously focused towards multiplayer, as my channel is primarily geared towards multiplayer. So anyway, getting to Bretonnia. So we've got a number of Lord choices here. We'll start with the good old Lord. He is your bog standard melee character. Can go on foot, on a barded warhorse, broil pegasus, and a hippogriff. We're going to see the same mount combination several times. He's got foe seeker, deadly onslaught for a bit more charge bonus, and armor piercing and everything. Stand your ground for items. He's got crown of command and sword of anti-heroes. Not really the most powerful character, but he is relatively cheap, even when you kit him out fully. Only 2100, so that's not bad. For his legendary Lord counterpart, we've got Alberic de Bordelot. So Alberic is very similar to the Lord here. You can see he's just got slightly more health, slightly better melee defense, but less melee, Alberic, yeah, less melee defense, but slightly better melee attack, higher charge bonus, and he also has a couple special abilities, as well as anti-large. So he does carry a bonus versus large of 30. That stays with him regardless of mount choices. So you can put him up on a hippogriff, give him anti-large armor piercing. He's got, in terms of abilities, he's got this Spirit of the Tempest, which gives all units in an area of effect a bit more speed and charge bonus. A nice little buff. Not super intense, but it's something, especially for a faction with high charge across the board. Very nice to have that extra charge bonus. Foe Seeker, Rally, and Heroic Killing Blow, which gives him quite a bit more armor piercing damage. He's also got the Wrath of Manan. This is a wind spell that currently doesn't do very much, although I should have also probably said this at the beginning, but I am recording this just after the announcement for the Vampire Coast, so in about a month we're going to be getting a patch that will change some things, so, you know, take this with a grain of salt. I would highly recommend, and if I can remember, there should be a card popping in the top right now. Go ahead and watch the How to Read Stats video, so that as updates come out and things change, you can sort of praise yourselves and look at the stats and try and figure out for yourselves how things would have changed from what I'm talking about here. But in general, Wrath of Manan right now doesn't do a whole lot of damage. I would definitely not recommend it, but we'll see if this gets changed in the upcoming patch. Of course, with it being sort of a naval-focused DLC with the Vampire Coast, Alberic de Bordelot, of course, is the worshipper of Manan, the god of the sea for Bretonnia, so it would make sense that maybe he would get some love, but we'll have to wait and see. Moving on, we've got the old prophetesses. So we've got 3 Lords of Magic here, all 3 available to Bretonnia: Beasts, Life, and Heavens. Again, I've got guides on all Lords of Magic, so I'm not going to talk too much individually about them here. As far as the Prophetess herself, she's got 3 mount options: Warhorse, Barded Warhorse, and Pegasus, so you can put her up in the air. She's got 2 items: Channeling Staff, which is, you know, fairly bog standard ability recharge item, and she's also got this Assault of Stone Bombardment, which is a cool bombardment spell. One-time use, does quite a bit of damage, but only 110 gold, so might potentially be worth it. And again, just they've also got this ability here, Aura of the Lady, which gives 12% magic resistance in an area of effect. Also a very nice effect to have. So that's pretty much it for the Prophetess. She's your generic caster lord, very squishy in melee, but able to go up in the air. Moving on, 2 more legendary lords. We've got Lewin Leon Kerr. He's got all the same mount choices as the lords, but he's got his own unique hippogriff, Beaky, who I like to call, Beaky, because I probably can't pronounce it correctly. But anyway, this is a unique hippogriff that has more health, better weapon damage. Well, actually, yeah, better weapon damage. Same charge bonus, same speed, but In general, it makes Lewin an absolute powerhouse. In terms of his abilities here, we'll go through these. Ladies Champion is the essential one you want to bring. It is his regeneration ability, although critically you'll want to note it only has one use, which means if it drops, it won't come back. And if Lewin's leadership gets broken at any point, if he routs, the effect will get disabled. So you want to make sure Lewin doesn't get routed off at any point in the battle, otherwise you'll lose this effect. Very important to keep that regeneration. It's also got Beloved Son of Bretonnia. This is a little bit of a weird effect because it won't go off if Lewin is above 50% HP, so he has to be below 50% HP for this to go off. It gives a map-wide effect of 8 melee attack, essentially Frenzy, charge bonus weapon damage. It essentially gives Frenzy map-wide, more or less, but it can't target units if their leadership is lower than 50%, so it's kind of weird in that if Lewin is below half health, most likely a lot of your army is not going to be doing great on leadership, just in a general sense, so I generally will cut this one similar to one of Thorgrim's abilities. It's just kind of weirdly situational, and I often don't find it is really all that useful, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that here. I will typically cut that in most multiplayer battles. He also has Foe Seeker, Stand Your Ground, and the Lion's Shield, which is an essential ability in my book. 44% missile and magic resistance. Very, very nice for tanking out missile and magic damage. And of course, the Sword of Corone, also a must pick in my opinion, gives an area of effect minus 30 armor and minus 27 melee defense, which is a very, very nice effect to have. Very good at bringing down your opponent's defensive stats so that the rest of your units, including Lewin himself, can get the damage done. Moving on, we're going to go to heroes next. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. The Paladin is your melee hero. He's got On Foot, Barded Warhorse, or Royal Pegasus. Paladin recently got some upgrades, so he now has anti-large, bonus versus large of 12. In terms of his abilities, he's got the Guardian trait, which gives him 18% physical resistance for any lords and heroes in an area of effect, so it kind of makes him like a bodyguard type character. He's also got Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught, of course. For items, he's got Potion of Foolhardiness for more charge bonus and Unbreakable, which can potentially be very useful, especially like if he's up on the Pegasus, already has very high charge bonus. You stack this Deadly Onslaught with the Potion of Foolhardiness, and you could really juice up this charge bonus very, very high. He's also got the Charmed Shield for some defensive stats. We've got your generic casters. Not a whole lot to talk about here. Again, same 3 Lords of Magic, Beast, Heavens, and Life. Mount options are going to be a Warhorse, Barded Warhorse. Oh, whoops, totally forgot to, speaking of mages, totally forgot to talk about the Fey Enchantress. We'll go back quickly to her. But she's only got the one mount choice. She is a Lore of Life caster, so all the standard Lore of Life spells. She only has silver on her Pegasus, which does give her some magic resistance, I believe. Let's see, baseline, she has 25%. Then up on the Pegasus, she has 60%. Yep, so she has heavy magic resistance on the Pegasus. And then, of course, her abilities here, in addition to Lore of Life, she has the Mist of the Lady. This is like a Mortis Engine type effect. It's a constant AoE drain if she's in melee. Also gives minus 5 melee attack, so a very nice effect, makes her a powerhouse. And Favor of the Fae, of course, plus 44 melee attack. On a single target, very, very useful ability to have. She's also got the Chalice of Potions, a big old bombardment, 2-time use, basically a bound Comet of Cassandora, more or less. 2-time use, so that's generally relatively useful, although sometimes not wildly useful. But anyway, going back to the generic caster ladies, the damsels, we pretty much already talked about. They do also have the unicorn mount, so they can also get the magic resistance, although it's worth noting their unicorn is substantially slower than the Fey Enchantresses, so just keep that in mind. They've also got this area of effect magic resistance, the Aura of the Lady, and for items they've got the Scroll of Shielding and the Power Stone for some additional magic recharge. And finally, we've got the unique kind of legendary quote-unquote hero for Bretonnia, the Green Knight. So the Green Knight is an ethereal duelist type character. He does have lots of physical resistance, only 55% baseline, but he does also have Blessing of the Lady, of course, bringing him up to the standard 75% for all ethereal units. Magic damage, he does do heavy armor-piercing damage, has good combat stats overall. He also has a couple of abilities here. The Sacred Guardian gives him HP replenishment if he's in the forest. And the Dolores Blade basically just gives him a huge damage spike, makes him an absolute powerhouse at dealing damage. The only issue is, of course, he is ethereal, so he has relatively low HP, still one of the higher HP pools for an ethereal hero, but still relatively low. He also has no armor whatsoever, relying entirely on that physical resistance, so magic damage is pretty nasty against him, but can be particularly useful against factions which don't have a lot of magic damage options, but yeah, also very expensive. Anyway, let's move on. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot of these peasant infantry kind of all at once because they all share some similar traits. So every unit of infantry below the battle pilgrims are going to fall into the quote-unquote peasant infantry category. And, well, they're all technically peasants, but these guys all share a lot of traits, so I'm going to talk about them in the same way. They're all, you know, various weapon variations. We've got sword and spear, sword with shield, spear with shield, of course, just giving them more melee defense and missile block chance, and the halberd giving armor piercing and anti-large, of course. The spears also have anti-large, and the peasant mobs have absolutely nothing and have the worst stats ever. Well, almost, but anyway. Basically, all these units are going to be your expendable kind of fodder units. They all actually have the expendable trait now, which means that when they rout, they won't reduce your other units' leadership unless they're also expendable, but like your knights, for example, which Bretonnia very much revolves around, aren't going to be routed off or you know, have any leadership debuffs if these peasants rout, so that's very useful in and of itself. Just generally, the peasant units come in high numbers, 90 unit model count for regular and 120 for the mobs. They have okay stats for their cost. They're honestly reasonably cost effective considering how cheap they are. And yeah, that's their main benefit, is they're cheap. They allow you to fill out some extra bodies because, of course, Bretonnia revolves quite a bit around their knights. It just gives you lots of extra bodies to throw at your opponent for cheap. So yeah, we pretty much talked about all the weapon variations. Not a whole lot extra to go on there. We've also got next up the Grail Relic. This is a unique kind of support single entity. I won't call it a monster, but it's not really like a chariot either. It's just a support unit, basically. It has this effect here, Icon of Devotion, which gives plus 12 leadership and immune to psychology. Very important in that area of effect. Great for supporting peasant infantry or basically any units that need to be immune to psychology. Very, very useful if you expect to face terror units, which you can in almost every matchup now. The Grail Relic is definitely a strong pick. Only 500 points, relatively squishy, but again, it's more of a support unit rather than a fighter itself. Speaking of fighters, we've got Battle Pilgrims up next, including a Regiment of Renown variant. Battle Pilgrims are kind of crap right now. Hopefully that changes. Again, if you're watching this in the future, the Battle Pilgrims might be better now, but essentially they're like they're supposed to be the damage dealer, quote-unquote, infantry for Bretonnia. They don't actually deal that much damage at the end of the day. Just as a quick comparison, let's swap over to the Empire. I just want to show you guys, we're going to grab the unit card for Swordsmen, State Troop Swordsmen, and compare them one-to-one with Battle Pilgrims. You can see Battle Pilgrims have better leadership, but lower melee defense, slightly better weapon strength and charge bonus, and they also pick up Frenzy. So their defensive stats, though, and their armor is just as good or bad, depending on, I guess, your reference. But yeah, the Frenzy helps a little bit, but just in general, I found Battle Pilgrims not to be super cost effective. They're not really a great defensive unit, they're not really a great offensive unit, they're kind of weirdly priced at 600, as they're not really a good mid-tier infantry. They would be much better as a lower-tier infantry. But anyway, hoping these guys get some changes or a cost reduction. I would love to see them as kind of like a poor man's Sister of Slaughter, where they're more of a defensively focused infantry. The Regiment of Renown, though, is pretty solid. You can see they definitely make up for the lack of defensive stats there. They drop their shields in favor of another hand weapon, so they have more weapon strength. They have better melee attack, and yet still better melee defense despite the lack of a shield. They also have flaming and magic damage, so going to be very good in situations where that's pertinent, you know, against Skaven, vampire counts, that sort of thing. So while I don't really like the regular Battle Pilgrims right now, these Holy Wardens of La Maison Tal are quite good. Moving on to the last unit of infantry, we've got foot squires. So this is your great weapon type infantry. They don't have the best stats, but they do have armor piercing, anti-infantry, and 70 armor, which is the heaviest of any peasant infantry type. Yeah, 26 armor piercing with a 9 bonus versus infantry. Again, not the best stats, but there are only 650 points. Reasonably cost effective for that much. They also have a Regiment of Renown version, which swaps out the great weapon for a halberd. These guys have the same weapon damage stats as the men-at-arms with polearms. You can see 25 with a bonus versus large. Let's see, 17, 18 armor piercing. I believe it's going to be the same for the polearms. Yep. And instead they have 10 more armor than the regular foot squires because they decided to put on helmets, which is probably a good idea. Bit more leadership as well, and of course significantly more melee defense as they are a halberd unit and also a Regiment of Renown. So obviously they have charge defense against large, less charge bonus, but much better defensive stats. Very good stuff. And particularly I like these guys using like Favor of the Fae to juice up their melee attack. Makes them a very cost-effective kind of elite halberd unit, which the Bretonnia definitely needs. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But moving on to the well, not quite to the important bit yet. We do have 3 variants of peasant archers. Peasant archers are, archers. They've got flaming arrows and they've got poison arrows, all of which, have their own various uses. Don't really need to talk too much about them there. They are also expendable, of course, since they're peasants. But anyway, now moving on to the important bit, the cavalry. Got mounted yeomen, which are sort of your light cav, not super cost effective, but only 400 points. They also have vanguard and they're very fast, so, it gives you a light cavalry option. For the first unit of heavy shot cavalry, we've got the knights errant. So these are kind of like your younger knights looking to prove themselves in the world. Only 80 armor, but reasonably cost effective. 50 charge bonus, only 700 points for a unit of shot cavalry is very, very cheap. I think they're the cheapest shot cavalry in the game, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, 30 weapon strength, reasonable combat stats. Again, not amazing, but they are relatively cheap. Good speed and good mobility with, of course, the lance formation. They've also got a Regiment of Renown variant, which picks up a better missile block chance. They get Frenzy, which is an awesome trait. Again, extra charge bonus, melee attack, and weapon damage for a unit of knights is always welcome. And of course, they have better stats and leadership, as they are, of course, a Regiment of Renown. So I really like these guys for only 150 points more. Defenders of the Fleur-de-Lis are one of the most cost-effective units of cavalry in the game, in my opinion. Moving on, we've also got Knights of the Realm, again with a Regiment of Renown variant. These guys are a step up from the Knights Errant. They've got anti-large, better charge bonus, better weapon damage, just better stats across the board, more health, more armor, better leadership, same speed. And again, they have lance formation. These guys, of course, with their anti-large, are going to be better at facing enemy cavalry and monsters. The Knights of the Lion-Hearted Regiment of Renown version comes with a few extra abilities. They get magic damage for 1. They also cause fear, which is an interesting trait, going to be very good against certain factions. They have encourage as well, so they'll provide, similar to a heroic unit, they'll provide a leadership aura to nearby allies. And of course, being a Regiment of Renown, they've got better stats. Next up is the armor-piercing cavalry, the questing knights. These guys are like, a step up from Knights of the Realm in terms of their status in Bretonian society, and they also carry great swords. So they've got heavy armor-piercing damage, 36 armor-piercing with 12 regular weapon damage, good stats overall, good combat stats, only 80 armor, which is not amazing, but still they've got great leadership, great sustained combat stats, not quite as much of a charge bonus, but they're more meant as a melee cavalry rather than as a shot cavalry. Also have a Regiment of Renown variant that picks up, again, better stats and a few abilities here. Looks like they actually get the Blessing of the Lady. So this is the kind of one of the army-wide abilities. Not quite army-wide, but it's common to a lot of Bretonian units, that 20% physical resistance as long as their leadership is not broken. And they also gain fire resistance for whatever reason, which is nice in some niche situations. For the last 2 units of cavalry, we've got the Grail Knights. This is sort of the top-tier elite shot cavalry of Bretonnia. Quite expensive, but they have magic damage, great combat stats, an insanely high charge bonus of 78. They've got anti-large of 12, and one of their most important traits, they've got perfect vigor, What that means is they will never, ever, ever tire. They can run around full tilt the entire battle, continuously charging, cycle charging, pulling in and out, fighting to the end, and they will never get tired, which is an awesome trait to have. I can't stress how powerful that is. They also have Blessing of the Lady, of course, giving them physical resistance, and we do have one final variant here, similar to the Grail Knights, but a more defensively focused rather than offensively focused. You can see these guys have 56 melee defense, making them a very, very tanky unit. They also have more armor, up to 120 armor, and more health. So the Grail Guardian's going to be definitely your tanky melee cav. Great sustained stats. Don't have the best offensive stats, not the best armor piercing. 12 armor piercing is actually not bad. But yeah, they're going to be your tanks, essentially. We've also got a couple units of Missile Cav, or well, one unit of Missile Cav, rather, with the Regiment of Renown variant, mounted Yeoman Archers. They're Yeomen with bows. And the Wardens of Montfort there, the Regiment of Renown, of course, gain better stats. They also have a better charge bonus, making them a better hybrid, missile/melee cavalry. And they also gain poison missile attacks, which is nice. We've just got a couple more units to get through here, just about done. Pegasus Knights, and I'll include a couple of their Royal variant as well in this discussion. Currently aren't very good, unfortunately. Their pathing has never really been fixed from Total War Warhammer 1 properly. They used to be very, very good at charging like single entity monsters and just units in general. Right now, their mass is so light, they have issues following orders, and their pathing isn't very good. So the Pegasus Knights and the Royal Pegasus Knights both I would recommend against bringing currently. Again, this may have been updated in later patches, but they just, they struggle. They struggle pretty bad to get back up in the air. They struggle to do a lot of effective damage on the charge, especially the big single entity monsters. In terms of their traits, they do have anti-large, the high charge bonus. Of course, they're flying. They have Vanguard. Only a few unit models, though, means their impact is going to be relatively limited. The Royal Pegasus Knights pick up some of the Grail traits. They have Perfect Vigor, Blessing of the Lady, and Magic Damage. Similar story here, though. Anti-large, charge bonus, just the pathing and the mass and it's kind of the tertiary hidden stats aren't where they need to be for these guys. I also think that they could potentially use a little bit of an armor upgrade just to make them a bit tankier. But I've gone on enough about the Harpies. Got a couple of artillery choices: a regular trebuchet and a blessed trebuchet. The blessed trebuchet just has magic damage and does slightly more missile damage in total. And yeah, these are catapults, essentially. They do armor-piercing damage, not super accurate, but they do give you an artillery option, and can be a nice surprise pick in certain matchups, definitely. And last, but certainly not least, the good flying unit right now. I like these guys quite a bit better than the Pegasus Knights. We've got Royal Hippogriff Knights. So this is 6 knights astride hippogriffs, much like the Bretonnian lords. That gives them fear and terror, obviously. They also have Blessing of the Lady, good sustained combat stats, 90 armor, and they also have good armor-piercing weapon strength, of course, being on massive hippogriffs. 100 armor-piercing damage with 35 regular per model makes them an incredibly powerful unit. They are a little bit tricky to use in certain matchups, but they definitely can get some serious work done. I'm a fan of them, certainly, especially more so than the Pegasus Knights. But anyway, so that's the Bretonnia's roster in total. Honestly, not the biggest roster in the world, but you can definitely see their focus on heavy cavalry. So first, when you're playing as Bretonnia, their strengths, obviously, again, heavy cavalry. So it's a great faction to play if you want to learn how to micro cav effectively, because you will definitely need to. Just in general, playing them, I would definitely recommend pretty much always bringing Lore of Life, unless you're bringing a Bretonnian infantry build for some reason, which can work in certain niche situations. It's definitely not optimal. But if you have cavalry at all, I would definitely recommend bringing Lore of Life to heal them. It's a staple of Bretonnian play. You're going to need your knights to get a lot of work done because your infantry will struggle to be effective in a lot of situations. So Of course, on the flip side of that, when you're fighting against Bretonnia, cost-effective anti-cav tools are the name of the game. So you're going to need speed debuffs, you're going to need some probably anti-large armor piercing, preferably, although just anti-large or just armor piercing can get the job done. Bretonnia is also not super great against large armored single-entity monsters. They have only a handful of armor-piercing anti-large units that are all infantry. They do have some really good anti-large cav that can get the job done, but they are also not necessarily great. If you can wear down their heavy cavalry, then they really don't have a lot of answers to big armored single-entity monsters. So things like steam tanks, Ragnarok spiders, ancient treemen, stegodons, things like that that have very heavy armor, a lot of health, the ability to heal also sometimes, and but generally just the heavy armor, a lot of health, and terror and all that makes them very hard to deal with for Bretonnia. So just something to keep in mind. In terms of builds here, we can go through a couple of sample builds. If we go ahead and have a look, I'm just curious to see what I've got saved. So this is going to be more of a cav focused Fey Enchantress build. So a lot of the builds that I've been running recently, I haven't actually played them maybe for a couple weeks, but have been generally very heavy cavalry focused. So you can see with both of these past builds, I only have a few peasant mobs just to be speed bumps, essentially, just to screen out in case I need to pull back my cav force. But I'm going to be playing a very mobile style of play where I try and keep my cavalry kind of rolling around in a giant death blob, trying to isolate units and just alpha strike and quickly sweep them off the board anytime we can get an isolated unit, and sort of pick away at my opponent's flanks and just harry the formation until finally we can get the massive downhill back-breaking charge that we need. And this build is a prophetess up in the air, because she can go up in the air and the Fey Enchantress can't. That's the reason why I take her in certain matchups. In other matchups, obviously, the Fey Enchantress is going to be better when you don't feel as safe in the air and you want to just go on the ground. Let's see here. So this is a similar build. You can see we've still got the 3 Knights of the Realm, including the Regiment of Renown. We've got the 2 Grail Knights, the other 2 Regiment of Renown cav, the Defenders of the Fleur-de-Lis, and the Companions of Quenelle. We've just cut down a few of the yeomen and picked up a Paladin for the Fey Enchantress to kind of protect there. So a similar build here. I've also got a Lewin build, I believe, on here that's going to be something similar. Again, very, very cavalry focused. Not so much so on the infantry, definitely just a few speed bumps there. But this is generally how I play against most factions. Certainly it's not the only way to play Bretonnia, and it definitely demands a pretty high level of micro, because you've got a lot of heavy cavalry here that you're going to be trying to keep alive. But you certainly can go with the more traditional build with a few sort of regular units of infantry. In the past, Death Star builds with the Fey Enchantress have worked quite well. So again, something like this, where you use kind of the Grail Guardians to sit on top of the Fey Enchantress. I would maybe add some more peasant infantry in here as well, like maybe we grab some polearms or something, and just generally kind of play more of a Death Star style, where you use the healing of the Fey Enchantress and you use that Mist Lady to kind of drain your opponent down. That is also a viable-ish strategy, although it doesn't work quite as well as it used to in certain matchups, certainly. But yeah, generally, again, the name of the game for Bretonnia is going to be heavy cavalry, so whether you're playing as them or against them, just to be sure to plan for that. So this is pretty much all I've got for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this particular video. If you do like this sort of content, you find it helpful, be sure to share it with your friends. Really looking for some extra growth with these kind of guide type videos. So if you found this useful, be sure to share it with your friends or other players who you know may be looking for this type of information. And of course, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button so every time I upload a new video you'll be notified. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.